Well, Malachi Martin was a big name in radio in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. He was Art Bell's #1 most popular guest on the Coast to Coast show. Getting going here from September 11th, 1987. Kevin Doran spoke with Malachi Martin that day and year. Let's take a listen.
As you know, Pope John Paul II is now in the second part of his second trip to the United States, and we're very privileged to have back with us again this morning Malachi Martin, a theologian, a papal scholar, the author of 14 books. His latest, The Jesuits, an expose of the Jesuit order, a bestseller, soon to be out in paperback, by the way. So, welcome to our program, and
thank you for having me a second time.
Well, we appreciate you giving us your time. Now, we're about halfway through the Pope's visit, and there's a term that keeps popping up in the television coverage and in the newspapers, too. It's a term that I don't think we've heard too much in the past. The term is American Catholic Church. Now, we all know what the Roman Catholic Church is. I wonder if you could explain to me what they mean by the American Catholic Church, and in what ways are they different?
Well, at the present moment, it is now about 8:45 Eastern Standard Time, and the Pope is saying his own Mass and preparing to meet the bishops of America at 9 o'clock California time. And at that meeting, this is precisely the main theme we'll run through every remark made by the Pope and by the bishops. The American Catholic Church is the new church that at least one half of the American bishops and certainly 1/3 of American priests and some lay people are endeavoring to establish. It is a church independent of Rome in authority that makes its own rules as regards morality and makes its own rules of worship and decides what it is going to believe. It is an endeavor to create a church within a church and pretend that it is Catholic. It is the self-service cafeteria, pick your church attitude. You know, let me choose the red Jell-O over the green Jell-O because of my dentures, with the idea that you can be a Catholic and still accept only those part of Catholicism and the Roman Catholic Church that you wish. Now, speaking to these bishops today for 3 hours, from 9 o'clock until 12 o'clock California time, he will have in front of him those bishops who are endeavoring to set that church up, the bishops themselves who have, for instance, authorized an ecumenical service at the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception of Our Lady in Washington, D.C. on September 23 at the hour of 6 to 7 in the evening, conducted by no less a person than the Dalai Lama, who is an atheist. That's a desecration of Our Lady's shrine, but it's quite in keeping with this American church. It is Cardinal Bernardine of Chicago who contradicts the Vatican when it forbids in vitro fertilization. The cardinal will allow that and thus opposes a doctrine of the church. It is Bishop Head of Buffalo who conducts dignity services. And it is every bishop who it is Archbishop Borders of Baltimore. It is Bishop Clark of Rochester, New York, who insists on opposing the Vatican in the matter of altar girls. And it is Charlie Curran, who opposes the doctrine of the church in belief and in moral practice, and Richard McBrien, Father Richard McBrien of Notre Dame, Indiana, of Notre Dame University, who also contradicts the Vatican and teaches non-Catholic doctrine. And it is Sister Margaret Traxler of Chicago. And it is all the main leadership of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, who oppose the Vatican in belief and in practice on abortion, contraception, the divinity of Jesus, the existence of mortal sin and hell and heaven. In other words, they want to create a church where you pick and choose what suits you, and they're endeavoring to set this up. They haven't got a ghost of a chance, but they're doing a lot of damage and dragging a lot of Catholics away from their traditional beliefs. Now, the Pope is here to remind the bishops and the clergy and the nuns and the people, but primarily the bishops, since they are the pastors, that they are only Catholic when they are in communion with him and spreading and propagating the doctrine that he preaches. Because the old saying still holds, wherever Peter is, there is the church. And John Paul II represents Peter the Apostle, who represents Christ.
Dr. Martin, you said that you mentioned a lot of people there that were leading this American Catholic Church, and you said that they are promoting various ideas which are not in well, they're simply not what Catholics have been taught over the years, and they're not what the Pope is saying. However, these proponents of the American Catholic Church that I've been seeing on television say that they can find justification for their positions in the Second Vatican Council and in the teachings of some of the theologians.
Well, first of all, they are telling sometimes outright lies about the Second Vatican Council. They read it as they want to read it. If they read it exactly, there isn't one unorthodox statement in the Vatican Council. There are statements that can be interpreted one way or the other if you leave out the phrase going before or the sentence going afterwards. And that's what they do. Like, for instance, the Council speaks about the sense of the people, the instinct of the Catholic people. This has been quoted by so many of them to justify the people doing anything they want, like abortion, contraception, euthanasia. But in that same text it says that this instinct of the people must be guided by the Pope and the bishops in union with the Pope, and so on down the line. There's a misinterpretation of Vatican II which is sacrilegious and enormous.
Let's talk about one of the men you mentioned, you said was a leader in this new American Catholic Church, Father Charles Curran. Now, he was at Catholic University,
Right.
and he was subsequently fired, to put it very bluntly.
Right.
However, he came back to his home diocese, and this is his home diocese, Rochester. He went to Ithaca, right, and he holds a chair in Ithaca, the chair of Catholic religion, Catholic teaching, rather, in Ithaca. He still has a very, very important role to play in the media. He's very influential.
He is very influential because he's a spearhead and of rebellion and schism and heresy and sacrilegious doctrine. Charlie Curran, Father Charles Curran, says there is nothing wrong with homosexual practices, there's nothing wrong with abortion, there's nothing wrong with contraception, and in fact euthanasia could pass the muster too. And on various other points of belief, Charles Curran is not merely wonky, he is downright un-Catholic.
But, Dr. Martin, my question was, if he is all these things,
Yes.
how is it that he's allowed to continue to function at Ithaca, at Cornell University? He can still be quoted widely. Why isn't he, in short, why isn't he defrocked?
Because his bishop, Bishop Clark of Rochester, is a bishop whom we know is in favor of the American Catholic Church, and because the faith of bishops today is very, very weak. Some of them don't believe that Jesus was God. We are faced with the fact that there is emergent the outline of the American church. They're trying to set up the Americanist church, if you want, the Americanist Catholic Church. It is a wild endeavor to counteract the reform that this Pope wants to introduce into the shambles that has become the Church, Catholic Church in America. And that's why there's nobody to defrock him unless the Pope steps in.
Well, now, that's my next question. People who hear these discussions and hear what people are saying, priests like you and theologians like you have been saying this kind of thing for years, but observers will then come back with something like this. If all of this is true, why doesn't the Pope do something? For example, at General Motors or at Ford or Chrysler, let's take Chrysler, Lee Iacocca sets policy. There would come a time when, regardless of what his servants, if you will, regardless of what the workers at Chrysler, whatever power they may have, whatever the polls, he would fire them at some point. Why isn't the Pope doing this?
But, well, the comparison between General Motors, Lee Iacocca's corporation, and the Vatican Church, I mean, this enormous worldwide organization is run on completely different lines, and it is afflicted with a completely different ailment than an executive or a CEO in General Motors standing up and saying he disagrees with Lee Iacocca. They wouldn't wait for him to put on his cap, because that's the way it's set up and structured. The Vatican the Church is not structured in that way, and John Paul II is not proceeding to cut off all the heads he could lop off with one stroke of the pen or one telephone call. He is acting in a different way. He wants the local bishops to do their duty as pastors. He doesn't want to step over their heads just yet. You know, Kevin, if you want to know what is happening to the Catholic Church, and the real feeling, the malaise, it's the very same as the experience I had on an ocean-going liner, which the captain put in reverse. That's the way you stop a liner from moving. And when the screw of the ship is put in reverse, there's a deep shudder throughout the entire frame of the ship, and slowly it comes to a stop. and then reverses. That is what John Paul II is doing at the present moment. There is a shudder running through the entire structure, which is corrupt, with theologians and bishops and priests and nuns such as we are saddled with at the present moment. And they are going wilder and wilder according as the ship slowly, the bark of Peter slowly slows down and then reverses motion. In other words, the tactic and the strategy and the practice in the Catholic Church for ridding itself of these people who claim to be Catholic and are really heretics and have ceased to be Catholics, have excommunicated themselves by the way they live and the way they talk and teach and believe or don't believe. And that process is very different from a corporation. And this Pope, as you know, is not in any way out to cut off heads. He's getting at the pastors themselves, first of all, and getting them to do their duty, because he could lop off Charlie Curran's head and Richard McBrien's head and several Jesuits and several Dominicans and several theologians and bishops, and then he'd still have a church which was corrupt because he hadn't affected the structure.
So, in other words, he's got to work through his bishops, even though, according to you now, about half of these bishops are actually in rebellion.
Of course.
That's a rather tough job, isn't it?
It's a very tough job, and requires, if you notice, that he has avoided all confrontational things. For instance, when Father McNulty, greeting him in the name of the 55,000 American priests in Miami with bishops present and cardinals present, McNulty broke the rules and asked the Holy Father to reconsider the celibacy of priests and to reconsider it and allow them to get married. When he went up later to the dais and was embraced by the Pope looked him straight in the eye and said to him, "Father McNulty, it's a long, long way to Tipperary."
We'll be back in just a moment. We're talking with Dr. Malachi Martin.
The holiday season is the best time to enjoy family and friends and extend good wishes to all. The AmVets thank you for your support and sends their sincerest wish for a holiday that's happy all the way through. AmVets, Post 245, Broadway Mall, Hornell.
Brought to you by Attorney Tax. If you're in trouble with the IRS and owe at least $10,000 in back taxes, listen to this important public announcement. The IRS is now offering a special program called the Fresh Start Initiative, which can offer significantly reduced settlements that can reduce your liability by thousands of dollars. These unique programs have been allocated to help the economy and substantially reduce or eliminate your tax burden. If you're approved and qualified, the IRS will stop the collections against you. Don't feel overwhelmed. Please call the Consumer Hotline to see if you qualify. 800-333-9896. Stop the wage garnishments, levies, and tax liens now. If you owe more than $10,000 to the IRS, you may qualify for substantial relief and even forgiveness. See if you qualify and get the help you need by calling the Consumer Hotline. 800-333-9896. 800-333-9896. 800-333-9896.
Malachi Martin is saying that there are really two operations going here in America: the American Catholic Church, which he describes as schismatic and heretical, and the Roman Catholic Church. And you've put in the American Catholic Church the bishop of this diocese.
Oh, yes, that's his tendency is to create an American Catholic Church, and the language is always vague. You know, it's an amazing thing when you try to pin these people down, Kevin. The language changes from concrete to abstract, and then you hear a series of phrases in which the words have no meaning, and the phrases are tacked together like a prefabricated henhouse. It means nothing. It's very hard to tie them down. Once you tie them down, you find that they are nakedly and openly in rebellion, and nakedly and openly they don't believe the main dogmas and rules of the Catholic Church, especially the authority of the Pope.
Okay, now if we have two operations going here, the American Catholic Church and the Roman Catholic Church, and you're saying about 50% of the bishops are already over in this American Catholic Church, what about the educational system in this country?
The system in the Catholic Church in America is shot, mainly because of the defection of the nuns, and mainly because of the bad direction given by the local priests and by the bishops. They no longer teach catechism. They no longer teach the basic truths of faith. And no wonder the young people no longer understand and know their faith and know what a sacrament is and know what confession is and know what sin is, and therefore they're not going to go to Mass or confession, and they're going to indulge in all the sins that our society, our glorious society, tempts them to commit. So a reform, you see, this is the difficulty, Kevin, when you mentioned that why doesn't the Pope lop off the head of Charlie Kern? There's so many throughout the church, in America, in Canada, Australia, all of Europe, New Zealand. There's so many gone awry. He has no way of starting seminaries and schools. He has no way. He must start a reform of the structure itself, and in time, on the trickle-down theory and the theory that once you have a good bishop, he can reform his own particular diocese, which he will. This is the only way the Pope can act.
What about replacing if the bishops then? If he's not going after Kern, he's not going after McBride and these other ones you mentioned. Why doesn't he simply replace a bishop here and there?
Well, you see, he wants to replace about half our bishops, and certainly 3/4 of the Canadian bishops, and probably all of the Australian bishops, and probably 1/3 or 1/2 of English bishops, and so on down the line. He hasn't got the men. He hasn't got the men. And then there is the difficulty that some will refuse, and he has a schismatic church. In 1949, when the bench of Hungarian bishops signed a concordat with the communist government, which is always a reason for excommunication, Pius XII refused to excommunicate them. He said, each one will die, and we can replace them, because whereas they will die, the papacy will live forever.
You've described a situation here where if we put this to a vote, the Pope could very well lose. Now, how important are votes, how important are polls in the way the Catholic Church is run?
They have no importance at all. The poll, by the way, Dr. Johnson was once asked about polls and statistics, and he said, there are 3 kinds of lies, damn lies, and statistics. And you can take the statistics on the eve of a presidential election and make them favor the Democrat or the Republican according to where you put the question and the people you ask. But all that aside, the issues at stake in the Catholic Church, issues of spirit, are not sociological, and they're not biological or sexual or political. They're of spirit. And that cannot be determined by a poll, because only the Church, in its doctrine and in its wisdom and its infallibility, can decide an issue.
Malachi Martin, our time is up. I want to thank you very much for being with us. We've been talking with Malachi Martin, author of 14 books. His latest is The Jesuits, a bestseller. He's also been seen widely on television, especially in the past few weeks, as we've been getting ready for and observing the Pope's visit to this country. Thank you again, Dr. Martin, for being with us. The Newsmaker program returns tomorrow morning at this same time on the Information Source and News Authority. ABC News next.
So quite the show there from September 1987. Malachi Martin there. Malachi, by the way, was the top-rated talk show guest of the 1990s. Continuing now with ABC News from that day, September 11, 1987.
From ABC News, I'm Joe Templeton. They had a 3-hour meeting yesterday, and Secretary of State Schultz and Soviet Foreign Minister Shevardnadze are to sit down again at this hour for more negotiating. As Washington and Moscow move closer to a ban on medium-range missiles in Europe, and another superpower summit in the U.S. this fall. More from ABC's Herbert Kaplow at the State Department.
Secretary of State Schultz and Soviet Foreign Minister Shevardnadze resumed their deliberations here this morning, picking up where they left off yesterday on arms control. Before they get together again, each is expected to get a report from aides on how Soviet and American arms control specialists made out in their discussions together here last night. The general mood still seems optimistic on working out a medium-range missile agreement, limiting the number of missiles able to fly anywhere between 300 and about 3,300 miles. Herbert Kaplow, ABC News at the State Department.
Today's agenda for Schultz and Shevardnadze includes lunch at the Soviet Embassy in Washington and dinner at the State Department. Their talks are expected to end tomorrow with news conferences by both men. Negotiators for Ford Motor Company and the United Auto Workers Union continued talking throughout the night, hoping to avoid a strike by more than 100,000 workers. ABC's Gene Fogel in Detroit says their marathon session is apparently paying off.
Work has been completed on the thorny issue of job security. The automaker and the union are now putting the finishing touches on an economic package. It is traditionally true that a wage package is left for the last few hours of bargaining. The job security offer from Ford is being referred to as the Guaranteed Employment Numbers Program. Under the measure, all current Ford workers would be protected from indefinite layoff for the 3-year term of the contract. Temporary layoffs, though, would be permitted in the event of a downturn in sales. Gene Fogel, ABC News, Detroit.
Negotiators in the Chicago teacher strike have agreed to return to the bargaining table today. Pressure is mounting from city officials and parents to end the week-long walkout. Pope John Paul, on his second day in Los Angeles, will meet with 300 American bishops to discuss the state of the Catholic Church in the U.S. The Pope and the bishops are expected to discuss such issues as the desire of so many Catholics to make birth control and abortion decisions independently from the Church. Supreme Court nominee Robert Bork told members of the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday he's neither liberal nor conservative, but he does believe judges should not create new law. He'll answer more questions this morning when his confirmation hearings resume. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that cancer researchers have found that an experimental vaccine made from proteins increased survival rates of a group of lung cancer patients. The findings by the U.S. and Canadian scientists bolster hopes that a new form of cancer therapy called immunotherapy may be in the offing. The researchers point out that the vaccine was given to patients whose lung cancer had been caught in the early stages and who had undergone surgery for their cancer. Europe's Ariane rocket has blasted off from a space center on the northern coast of South Africa. The rocket carried 2 satellites into orbit. The government report shows 85% of the Social Security beneficiaries surveyed this year rate the Social Security service they received as good or very good, when the Irish Press newspaper in Dublin reports that former Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill will play an American businessman in a new movie being made in Ireland starring Peter O'Toole. O'Neill will make his feature film debut in High Spirits, the tale of a haunted Irish castle. For the ABC Information Network, I'm Joe Templeton.
And that's a wrap for today's Newsmaker Show. We just heard a ABC newscast from September 11th, 1987, with then anchor Joe Templeton, who was once described as being able to speak the most quickly and still be understandable. Before that, it was Malachi Martin, and before that, it was Dr. Christian Koff from May of 2014. Love putting these shows together. It's, as I said yesterday, it's kind of almost like a History Channel experience on the radio, going back and listening to these great shows from the archives. Stay with us. Merry Christmas. I'm Brian O'Neill. It's WLEA.